Trump also made this holiday weekend announcement that he will, he says, fire the FBI director that he named in his first term when Trump gets back in office. Now, let's just be clear right here. It is rare and major to fire any FBI director. They serve 10-year terms. They're some of the only executive officials who serve in such a long term precisely to avoid partisanship when administrations change hands. I'm putting up on the screen to remind you what it was like when Donald Trump, then as president, fired then Director Comey. It was huge breaking news across all the networks, interrupting coverage. It was seen for what it was, as a grave incident. It sparked the whole Mueller special counsel probe, and the headlines treated the move as a big, suspicious attack on the rule of law at the time. I show you that tonight by way of reference, because here we are, and Trump has now flooded the zone with so many extreme moves that this planned firing of his chosen director, Wray, is treated as something like a smaller subhead to this story. Take Politico, and this isn't a political observation, just they're a D.C. outlet, and they say Trump picks Patel to lead FBI. We have entered a period where it has been partially normalized to do something that I can tell you literally has almost never happened in history since the post-Hoover Watergate reforms, which is yanking an FBI director in the middle of their 10-year term. Now, firing the FBI pick without even a stated cause, again, is not normal and should not be treated as somehow a good idea or a normal part of law enforcement leadership, even if it is what the duly elected president-elect chooses to do. Donald Trump wants a partisan warrior to carry out his agenda. So there are actually two rule of law issues in all of these headlines: the planned firing of the director and a replacement who's widely criticized by his own former Trump-era colleagues and by Republican veterans like Bill Barr and by independent experts and by Democrats and civil libertarians. Kash Patel is facing mounting critiques over the facts of his record.
That FBI nomination is arguably a more extreme nomination than the accused child sex trafficker guy Trump wanted to make attorney general.
It doesn't surprise me that he will pick people that he believes are very loyal to himself. Profoundly unqualified.
I don't know him. I have read some of his comments.
He agrees with Donald Trump that the Department of Justice should serve to punish, lock up, and intimidate Donald Trump's political opponents.
This is not a drill, and this is not going from a Biden official to a Trump official, which is part of staffing a new administration. It's going from a Trump official to Kash Patel, one of the most criticized sort of extreme MAGA figures you could find, because apparently the Trump first term isn't good enough for what they have planned. James, it would seem this is big and different than just some of the other posts. You might be skeptical on the idea that the oversight or Senate process is going to do much with one-party control. But should people care about what I just said, which is the normalizing of this breach?
Of course they should care. I mean, it's the FBI, it's the Federal Bureau of Investigation. My goodness, look at the National Intelligence Director. I mean, of course you should care. But the reason they're doing this is, you're right, it's not normal, and that's the reason they're doing it, because it's not normal. That's the objective, is not to be normal. And they don't have, best as I can tell, they don't have any intention of conformity or normalization or anything else that we've kind of known and expected out of the federal government. And the FBI, the FBI director, is hugely influential in whether they open an investigation or close an investigation or what they do or what they don't do. We're going to find out just how influential it is. And maybe they'll, you know, Kash Patel, his logo is a K and then a $sign, Patel, which is kind of indicative of something now, isn't it? I don't know what, but about
he hawks a lot of products. Some of them are scams. Yeah, he's a big,
But being a scamster is what they're looking for. I don't know, but the new attorney general nominee for designate, I've read somewhere where she's somehow involved in Scientology. Oh, maybe we ought to get Larry Wright to look into that, who is like the foremost authority on this. And I mean, we're going to get flooded. And I don't know if that's true about Ms. Bondi, but I think I read that, I heard it. But be clear about that. But it's something that definitely needs to be looked in, and I think it will be looked into.
Well, and you have hearings, and you typically have FBI background checks to look at all of that, and we're tracing down everything and giving people the benefit of response.
Right.
As you may know, we do something a little old-fashioned at this table here at the Beat. We try to get everybody on, and then we fact-check and discuss.
I know that.
So just last night, I had a former Trump official, who you might remember, Gordon Sondland, on.
Yeah, I remember.
And
Ambassador.
one of the defenses he makes of Trump now is what I mentioned earlier. He either says, don't take him literally, or you don't have to worry about that because he lies. And he argues, and you could call this a reach, or you could call it cynical, that the lies are part of the show. So just go with it. Here's how he makes that defense. Take a listen.
I don't believe for a second that Donald Trump is going to sell out Ukraine.
You mentioned whether Trump's going to sell out Ukraine. I mean, it's something he literally threatened to do before. Whether the threats go somewhere, right, we're all going to be tracking.
He also said people are eating dogs and cats, and they're not.
Right. So So you're using his falsehoods to say, okay.
They're not falsehoods. They're Trump hyperbole. It's the show. I love the show.
Is that an acceptable defense over the next 4 years? How do you, as a Democrat, address that? How do you counter that?
Well, I won't pay attention to what he says. I'll look what he does. He actually appointed Matt Gaetz, that made him the designate to be Attorney General of the United States. He actually said, I want Kash Patel to be the FBI director. He actually said, I want Tulsi Gabbard to be the director of national intelligence. He actually said that he wanted Pete Hegseth to be the DOD head. I mean, I don't have to. Some seems like a nice man. I think I've met him once or twice. I think he was in the hotel business. It's probably a pretty good business. He's either a fool or he's playing a fool on TV. I can't make up which one it is, but it's one of the two. I don't have to pay any attention to anything he says. Just look at what he's doing.
Yeah.
That's all you got to do.
And I think that's fair. You're coming very close to calling the ambassador a fool on the hill, if you know that musical reference.
I mean,
do you remember that one? That's your era. It's a Beatles reference.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I remember when he was all tied up, I think he was the EU ambassador.
EU, and then he was a type of witness, yep.
But seems like a personable guy. But what is he saying? You're just sitting there saying something that either he just chooses not to believe or is just saying in spite of it, or maybe Trump will see that and believe him. But they keep saying that. Oh, don't worry. It's fine. He just does that. That's just showmanship. Look at Project 2025, which is nothing but a bunch of crackpots and second-rate academics, and they're going to be some of the most powerful people in the United States government. Yeah. And he said, oh, I don't have anything to do with that. Okay, so they paid attention to him. And he gets in, look what he's doing. I think that Pastor Sondland, you shouldn't pay attention to what he says. You should really pay attention to what he does. And what he's doing is so frightening, it's incomprehensible.